You too.
Sending you our best in this during this hard time. Okay, so I think we've officially started.
I'm supposed to open the meeting, aren't I?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman.
So we will officially start the meeting on January 9th at 5:02 p.m. I am supposed to go around and just say everyone's name who is attending. You don't have to acknowledge. So in this meeting is myself, Risha Hess, Jack, Premila, Betsy, and Daya. And Daya, every time I am not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Can you tell me one more time?
It's
Is it
Daya. You're
It's
right.
Daya. Okay, sorry. So let me pull up the agenda. I think usually the first thing to do is to see if anybody had any comments on the minutes from last month, which were the December 5th. Did anyone have any concerns or comments or additions to those? I'm going to take that as a no. So if not, does someone move to approve them?
I'll move.
Great, and a second?
Yep.
I'll second.
Great, thanks, Premila. So Jack, aye or nay?
Yeah, I'm having problems getting my documents together here. I'm sorry. Yes, approve.
Okay, Betsy? May not be able to turn off the the mute at the moment. Can I just ask a procedural question? If the people who say they wanted to, they motion and second, do they have to also then vote? It always feels repetitive.
I think, is it possible just to say all in favor, aye, or any opposed, and just have people put their hands up versus having to call on everyone like that? I've seen other meetings do it that way.
Premila, did you have a suggestion?
No, only that's how we did it with the last board, but that doesn't mean it was correct and needed to have all of us to say aye, even the ones who proposed.
Well, I'll
No.
say aye. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you, Betsy.
Okay.
Okay, so if I'm going to say then that everyone has said aye, I say aye, and they are approved. And I'll maybe see if I can figure out a more efficient way of taking votes in the future.
Yeah, I think there's no right way to do it. As long as everyone's vote is counted, that's what's most important. So I think we can make it easier on ourselves.
Okay,
In the
it always
future,
just
yeah.
feels so silly to ask the people who've already said yes.
Yeah.
All right, so we are moving to public comment. It looks like we might have some people here.
I think I see
Yeah.
a person. I can allow them to talk if they would like to.
So we see there's one attendee, Andrew Parker. And Andrew, if you'd like to make a comment, we're going to unmute you. You should be able to say something.
I think I'm all set. Thank you very much, though.
Oh, okay. All right. You're just listening in?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
We get so few listeners, we don't know what to do with you. But you're welcome. Great. Well, the next items are the past business, and we'll start off, Kiko, with you on the public hearing for tobacco regulations.
Okay, great. So as we discussed at the last meeting, we are moving ahead with plans for a public hearing on February 6th, 2025, which is the time of the board meeting. So we agreed in the last meeting that, and this was in the minutes that you all just approved, that we would have a brief Board of Health meeting from 4:30 to 5 with covering any necessary items. And then the public hearing would start at 5 o'clock. And so we are still moving ahead with that. plan. And I will give more details about how the public hearing works, where we're going to hold it, how that's all going to go in a minute. But I wanted, in preparation for the meeting, I really just wanted to be it's a lot of work to prepare for a public hearing. And we do have to put, send letters out to all of the retailers who sell tobacco products, informing them of the hearing, informing them of the changes to the regulations that will be discussed at the hearing. And so I just wanted to make sure that our tobacco regulations were shipshape. And so I went through them with a fine-toothed comb. I know we've talked about them quite a bit in this group, and I'm not trying to rehash anything. I just noticed a couple of things that I think we might have overlooked that are worthy of discussion, that the board may have overlooked, and just one or two items that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. So Maheen had sent the model regulations. So the state, or actually it's MAHB, the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards, which is sort of an independent entity, develops these model regs, and their attorneys actually update them periodically, like consistently throughout the year. And so there is the newest iteration is dated 2025, and that is not the one that we have looked at together as a group. So that I looked at it, Maheen and I looked at it, and thank you, Maheen, for all your hard work comparing this latest iteration of the model with our most recent draft. And there were just a couple of things that were different that we wanted to discuss with you all. So in the packet is that model reg, and there are lots of highlights in that document, but the ones that are red type highlighted in yellow are the things that are in the model regs that are not in our draft that we thought were worthy of a discussion today. So that's where I'm going to kind of start the conversation. And then in going through the regs, I found one or two things that I think are slight mistakes that we should correct, again, in the interest of having a not perfect, but the best document that we can present to the community in February. I thought it'd be worth taking some time to talk about that as a group today. So unless there are any questions, I'm going to move ahead then to go through that model document that Maheen had marked up. Does that sound like a plan?
Yep.
Okay. So, so moving through, under the statement of purpose, there are 3 new pieces of evidence that are primarily about oral nicotine pouches that we didn't have in our draft. So those are in red lettering, highlighted in yellow, about spitless tobacco, including oral nicotine pouches, how the sales have increased, basically about the damage that nicotine can do to the developing adolescent brain, and then how inexpensive these pouches are. So I was actually told by the MAHB folks that this kind of stuff, which doesn't substantively change the regulation, we can always add into our regs without actually having a board meeting to discuss. But since we're all here, I just wanted to draw people's attention to it. And also because I didn't realize until just recently that we actually do have language in these most recent regs about oral nicotine pouches, that the regs that you all approved as a board do restrict the sale of oral nicotine pouches to adult-only establishments, which is a change from what we used to have in our regs. So given that that is something that this group had already voted on, whether we called it out explicitly or not, it was in the version that you all approved, I feel like it's important to have the corresponding evidence listed in the beginning section. So that's the first item to talk about. Any thoughts, concerns, questions about those 3 pieces of evidence? Oh, there's a kitty joining us.
Nothing from
That's-
my side. I would just say, as you said, it seems like non-substantive. It's not a policy. It's just the evidence. We can add it in at any point. I have no issue adding it in at this point.
Great.
I also have no issue adding it in at this point.
Okay, so if there aren't any concerns, then I'm just going to keep moving through this document. The next piece is on the under C, definitions. And it's a simple sentence about the entrance to the establishment being secure so that access to the establishment is restricted to employees and to those 21 years or older for adult-only retail tobacco stores. And for some reason, that sentence was not in the Amherst version of the regulations. I don't know if it got overlooked or if this is a piece that was added later. It was it wasn't indicated that it was a new piece, but Maheen noticed it, so we wanted to bring it to your attention. It's again, just sort of fine tuning the definitions, not a policy change, but just better language. Any concerns, objections, questions?
Is that true now, that the entrances have to be secure? I don't, well, I guess if it did, then it would be in our regulations, wouldn't it?
I think our regulations say, I'm not looking at them side by side, so someone can correct me, but I mean, they cannot share an entrance with another establishment, and they have to be 21 and over only. So I think, and I don't necessarily have any issue with the language, but I think it's sort of implied. I'm not sure what secure means, and I don't want gates or deadbolts or something. So I worry a little bit about that word secure, but conceptually, I think we agree that it should be an entrance that not a bunch of, there's no other reason to enter, and therefore no one would enter other than people who are allowed to be in the shop.
That was the question mark in my mind too. The statement of must be secure. So it almost implies like card access, or as you said, being let into the store. So I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, our regulations currently read an establishment that does not share space with another business that has a separate entrance not used by any other retailer that does not sell food, beverages, or alcohol, blah, 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 blah. So it's fairly clear that it must have a separate entrance not used by any other retailer. And in which the entry of persons under the age of 21 is prohibited at all times. So I think it's a good point that secure is sort of a tricky word. And, it does imply badge access or a key or something like that. And maybe it's overkill and not needed, which is fine if that's what the board thinks.
Kiko, I'm lost on which document we're looking at.
Okay,
And
so we're looking at.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But
That's okay. You said you were having trouble finding all your documents. It is a lot of different material, lots of different versions.
Yeah, I don't know what document we're looking at, to tell you the truth.
We're looking at the document that is titled at on the very first page. It says in capitals, FY 2025 sample regulations restricting the sale of nicotine products, and it has a bunch of highlights in it.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. What's the name of the file?
Model. It's called Model State Regs, I believe. Model has models in the title.
Yeah, MA Model Tobacco Sale
Okay.
Regulations.
All right.
And
you
we're on
you put the yellow
page-
highlight on there?
Yes, the
Okay.
red font and yellow highlight was added by us.
Okay.
So the
And I
piece that-
don't,
Go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I think we're saying the same thing. I don't think that there's page numbers on it, but I'm on the 4th page currently.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's we're looking at under definitions, which is subsection C,
Got it.
the
Yeah.
definition of adult-only retail tobacco store.
I would like to comment on the secure aspect. I think this word is also used in restriction or regulation of cannabis retail. And in that context, to my knowledge, there's like card access, the equivalent of a bouncer at the door checking IDs and so on. I think it might be potentially an overkill here. But then again, if the goal is to eventually to consider phasing out tobacco, then perhaps this might help in some way. I don't know.
it feels like a change, a substantive change in intention around what we thought we were requiring. So, given everyone's context of the word safe, so it does feel like that's not something we had considered previously, and we certainly could consider it now, but it is not just adding a few words without changing meaning. I'm personally not particularly excited to add in the security feature. It doesn't feel like I obviously, it, like any bouncer at a bar, there is an added level of, okay, let's make sure people who aren't intended to be in here aren't in here, but how many people are trying to? It's not a social spot. You don't stay there and smoke in the place, I don't think.
I think it might be good then just to omit the word, or to perhaps or to restructure the sentence so that it's clear that we should check IDs, but not so we need to deadbolt.
And there's ID checking in other parts. So this is really just about the as you enter bit. And I think the alternative would just be not to add this sentence, and keep ours as they are. But I'm interested in what others think around this idea.
Do we have an example of this type of store in town?
There's one
Yeah.
behind, oh God, I always forget who has moved into those spaces. Sort of in that parking lot with CVS, there's some stores back there. And there's
okay.
there's one adult only tobacco retailer there.
Yeah, in fact, it's Lazy Lungs is the name of that store. And it has two separate entrances. One is for the adult only part of the establishment, and the other is for the all ages section. And there's a wall between the two, and you can only staff can enter both. As a consumer, if you want to go into the adult only place, you have to go through the specific entrance for the adult only. And there was a lot of conversation with the inspections department and whatnot when they were setting up the store to make sure that it was in compliance.
I have a question about this line that we're discussing. It's mentioned specifically employees and those 21 years or older. I'm not sure. I haven't combed through this, but I'm wondering if employees being over 21 is mentioned elsewhere.
I know we had the conversation about employees selling tobacco don't have to be, I keep closing it by accident, don't have to be over the age of 21, but I have to double check whether that goes for adult only also, or because most of the places that sell tobacco are gas stations, right? Like convenience stores. And so you don't have to be over the age of 21 to sell tobacco in that case, or to work there. Maybe you do to actually sell. I'll have to read it. Anyone else recall that off the top of their head?
I'm trying to find it in the regs right now.
While Kiko's looking, just from like empirical observation, I've definitely seen people who are under 21 selling tobacco to older folks. I guess if that line is supposed to be regulatory in some way, that's something to consider. Otherwise, I'm happy to omit it.
I don't know about that. I think so. We have, I mean, this is in our version under definition, is that the establishment shall not allow anyone under the age of 21 to work at the establishment under the definition of adult only retail.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I think that that is the way it needs to be. For gas stations, it doesn't matter, but for adult only smoke shops, nobody can be under 21 who's working there.
So it's a little bit redundant to say employees and those under.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
21.
feeling like based on what you all are saying, the sense I'm getting is that that sentence is not necessary, and we're fully conveying the important stuff with the way it's currently written.
That's my take, but I'm open to other opinions on this.
Are we ready for?
And I think just as, sorry, as a matter of process, we probably won't vote on each of these individually. So we'll vote at the very end, making all the recommendations.
Sounds right. Should we move on then? Yeah, okay. So next is, there's just a few more. Okay, so this is again in the definition section under manufacturer documentation. So these are the letters that come from manufacturers that certify that their products are not flavored, since any kind of flavored nicotine product is illegal in the state of Massachusetts. So whenever anybody comes out with a new product, they have to submit a letter that says, this is not a flavored product. So then this just adds, so everything that you see here up to the yellow is what's currently in the Amherst regs under the definition of manufacturer determination, but then these are additional qualifiers that were put in that were suggested. So again, it's sort of more detail about what this letter should have in it. And most of the letters that I've seen one came across my desk fairly recently for a new product. It's Newport, which used to be a menthol, and they have a new product which looks different, and they're saying it's not a mentholated product, and this is why it's not a flavored product. And so it's a letter that kind of hits all of these things, as far as I know, anyway.
I would be in favor of keeping these in. Sorry, I know we're not voting. I just wanted to mention.
It's okay.
There's no way to talk about it without sort of saying that we.
An opinion, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I don't think I
it's-
have any objection either.
No, I don't either. It just number one is really sort of a redundant. If you change our, excuse me, what's written in our regs as a written document from the manufacturer as opposed to a manufacturer, then number one is covered. And I don't have any problems with the others.
Yeah, good point.
Now, is there a document that you have provided, Kiko, that cross-references this, like what Premila was just mentioning, where because I'm really like just not familiar with these as much as, you know, as being, I think it's because I'm a newbie, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, Jack,
But
it's
I'm sorry I can't
highlighted.
contribute more, but
Yeah.
this
It's
is
right above the highlight. Manufacturer documentation, it says that sentence, so it's in the material we were given.
oh, so the same.
Same
Okay, I'm
document,
just
yeah.
trying to cross-reference our bylaw with this.
So,
we
yeah.
just have one document open right now. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and Kiko had mentioned that first paragraph that precedes the highlight is exactly word for word what's in ours now.
Okay, like I wouldn't be able to find that in our current without like throwing something on a shared screen or something like that. But
Yeah, so I'm trying to help out because I've got the hard copy here. I have what you have on my screen and I have the hard copy in front of me. So that's why I said what I see in our hard copy is everything up to the highlight in
yeah,
our copy. Yeah.
I'm just saying maybe a shared screen wouldn't be a horrible idea, although I am following along at this point. But
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's no reason why we can't share screen here in the meeting if that would be helpful. I can't show two documents at once, though. You can only show one.
I would find it helpful because I'm working on a phone and can't get to that other document.
Okay, so then I guess what I can do is I can
Oh.
share what I'm
Is it
looking
one
at.
in PDF and one in Word? Or I would
Yes.
think you'd be able to
Yeah.
switch back and forth.
I don't know that we need to, as a group, switch back and forth. I think, you know, those of us who have the other one open can just sort of say what the differences are, because it's not I mean, I think the entire idea here is that someone has already done the work of comparing word for word, and the highlighted bits are the parts that aren't in ours.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're pretty aligned with what's in the non-highlighted parts. Having
Yeah.
said that, we have a different structure than the regs, so it's not actually that easy to find where all these things are.
Yeah. I think, am I sharing something right now? Do you see anything? Yeah.
Yep.
So you see the highlights that we're talking about right now under the manufacturer documentation.
And just thinking about Betsy being on a phone, if you could maybe zoom in a bit.
Thank you. Actually, I can see this.
Okay.
Very
Okay.
helpful. The old eyes are still working enough.
Yay. And my old brain can't figure out how to zoom. So if it's okay, I'm just going to keep going. Is that okay? That you can see it all right? Okay. Because I can't see how it looks to you. I only see you all, and then it's on a separate screen for me. So, okay. So then the next thing that we're looking at is retail establishment, the definition of a retail establishment. This is very basic. We refer to retail establishment in our regs, but we don't have a definition for it. So that's seems like it's an oversight. Feels like that should go in.
Yep.
It's fairly
Sounds right to me.
straightforward. Okay. Okay. Scrolling. What's next? Okay, this is the last thing. I was surprised, right, Maheen? You ran over this really with a fine-tooth comb, and I also looked as well, and there's no language in our regulations about this number 8, A and B. So, and maybe it's because you all decided not to put it in, because the first one is that the permit can be suspended, revoked, or not renewed if the person applying for or the entity applying for the permit has violated any provision of state or local laws and or regulations.
There was no discussion about this that I was part of. So either offline or during the meetings. So I suspect either it is a new part of the model, or it was overlooked. I don't think it was an intentional, we don't like it.
What section in our bylaws would this pertain to?
So that's where what Risha is saying, they're not sort of
it took me a long time to find it when I was trying to figure out what we said. But it is in there. Hold on.
I think it would be under section C in our regulations. It would be under section C number 3, which is tobacco product sales permits. It talks about the conditions by which permits are issued and need to be displayed, and there wasn't any language in there about this revocation for fraud or violating state or local laws.
Okay.
Yeah, I found it a bit funny in the way that we have it, and also what's in the model is that they so it's not just fines in the previous paragraphs, it's fines and suspensions. And then it says, in addition to the fines above, you can also be suspended, but there's already suspensions in there. So I did find it a little sort of tricky to, it feels like it's an additional suspension, not because those already come with potential suspensions.
Right, it's suspension for reasons not related to behavior that is connected to the tobacco, selling of tobacco. It's revocation for other non-tobacco related reasons, as I read it.
I guess the part that confused me is in addition to the fines stated above, and all of the fines stated above are about those kinds of violations.
Yeah,
So for simplicity's sake, if we wanted to keep it conceptually, I might rewrite that first sentence to just say, in addition to the above and not the fines above. It also just says you cannot serve suspensions concurrently. And I think that's relevant because if you had a fine and a suspension from an earlier thing, and then you're adding a suspension to it, it would be an additional.
Yeah, I would agree. If we did end up including this, which I think we probably should, then rewriting 0.7 would be a good point.
Agree.
so I'm just trying to make sure because 0.7 is not highlighted by Maheen. So
Right,
that
yeah,
makes me
you're
think that
right,
it's
you're
in
right.
there, but maybe I'm wrong because I don't.
No, it is in there. I guess I find it confusing. You're right. That's not really the point that we're trying to make here.
Right. The point is, do you want to include that the permit can be revoked for these other reasons, fraud, etc.?
I guess, okay. Where I was headed in my thinking was, is there like, obviously if they have fraud, there are other policies that that presumably would impact things, but I guess maybe they wouldn't specifically impact the tobacco license. And so this is needed in addition to anything else. Yeah, I don't have an issue, I don't think, with having an option to suspend for fraud and or other violations.
Because that's the key word. It's may, it's not shall, so it is an option. It doesn't have to happen. That's the way it's worded.
And it's not unrelated, right? I mean, it's fraud in connection with an application for a permit. So it's not like, hey, you've, defrauded the IRS, we're going to revoke your tobacco license. It is related to the tobacco license itself.
Yeah, I mean, that seems, if you discover that someone who's applying for a permit is fraudulently misrepresenting themselves in that permit, wouldn't that be a problem? That's what it's essentially saying, right?
Yeah.
I think A is a bit more broad. B, you're right, is related to the application for the permit. A is about violation of any provision of state or local laws. So I think it's a question of how punitive does the board want to be with respect to revoking tobacco licenses if other things are happening.
I guess to me, the key word there would be the may. I certainly wouldn't want to, by default, say that if you violated another law, you lose your license, your tobacco license. On the other hand, trying to think through all possible scenarios is not something I'm good at this moment, but I can imagine a scenario where it's just gotten fairly egregious so that there's a violation of tobacco and they've done, I don't know, fair labor laws or some such thing. And I don't know, it's hard to think of an example where you would actually want to put this on top, but it's putting it in the policies gives us an option, but doesn't make us have to.
Yeah, I would concur here. I think I think the inclusion of the word may is sort of critical, but I do think we should include the full sort of maybe suspended, revoked, or not renewed. And for the reasons broad as they may be, and we don't need to envision the scenarios, like all possible scenarios, thankfully. But I think this protects us for the future in ways that could allow us some more broad overview, if you will.
Yeah, I agree with Daya. The word may is very comforting in terms of what we may or may not do.
It feels like it's there for a worst case scenario, and we hope there isn't a worst case scenario, and maybe we can't even envision the worst case scenario, but it gives us an extra tool if something that we can't quite imagine happens.
Okay, good discussion. I think that's the last item that we noticed that was different. I have two other things I wanted to bring to your attention. One is looking at our version of the regs under the retail density section. No, wait, gosh, let me make sure I'm finding it. Sorry, it's under regulations specific to adult-only retail tobacco stores. So this is in our regulations, it's on page 9. It's 5, section E. Sorry, these are so long. Let me just make sure I'm directing it to the right place. Yeah, it's under regulations, so section 5, and then it's letter E. And maybe my brain is not working, entirely possible, but what sort of drew my attention was number 3. A tobacco sales permit for an adult-only retail tobacco store shall not be issued to an applicant for a retail location within 50 feet of an existing retailer with a valid tobacco product sales permit. So if you're 75 feet away, you can have a store. Then you'd have 2 adult-only stores in close proximity to each other. I think that's an error, 50. That should be a bigger number, right? Thank you, Daya, for nodding your head. Like, wait, am I reading this wrong?
Well, but wouldn't that ban what we have? Because it's not 2 adult only, it's an adult only and a regular tobacco permit.
I see what you're saying.
But we still have to consider that situation where you have two separate
Adult.
Wait,
but why would we care? I guess that's density.
So wait, Risha, what are you saying about wouldn't that?
So I always forget the name of it, but the adult only store that we have in town is right next to, as you said, another tobacco permitted
It's
place,
all one
right?
permit.
No,
It's all one permit. It's one store, one permit. It's not 2 permits issued next to each other. It's Lazy Lungs, and they have 2.
Do they sell tobacco product in the other half of the store?
They sell
all
like,
ages?
Stuff, paraphernalia, smoking paraphernalia, and things like that.
But maybe not. Okay. I guess I had read this to be for those kinds of situations where you've got an all ages tobacco permit. They can't have, so they must only have an adult only tobacco permit, and then the other half doesn't actually sell tobacco, it just sells paraphernalia, and they don't need to have that license there.
No, I'm trying to remember. I think that's correct. Yeah, I think they have 1 permit to sell tobacco in an adult only setting, which is their store that's separated from the other one. And the other one has paraphernalia, t-shirts, bongs, things like that. So not tobacco products. All the tobacco stuff is on the other side because they have the vapes with the higher concentration that can only be sold in adult only stores. And all of those things are in the adult. So their permit is an adult only permit. And the other store, you're right, is not permitted to sell tobacco products. So, but with this currently written the way it's written, as I read it, someone could set up a little shack 100 feet away and have it be another adult retailer, tobacco retailer. And so it's creating more density instead of less density, the way this is written. So I don't think it's written to accommodate something we already have, unless I'm completely wrong. It's instead written incorrectly to foster density instead of discourage it. Because the way we've written the retail density about, or the provision about not having a tobacco retailer near a school is that it must be, it can't be within 500 feet, or maybe it should be within 2,000 feet. You're allowed to say that. So the farther away, the better.
Yeah, I suspect a 0 got dropped here, probably.
That's what I thought too. And so it surprised me, and I wanted to bring it to your attention.
I'm trying to look at what else we landed on the density. I know we had the whole conversation about it. Okay, so the regular density is 500 feet.
From a school, right?
Just the school. No. Yeah, that's all. That's the only. So there is actually no provisions in our regulations for 2 non-adult tobacco licenses. If they're not near a school or, one of those special places, you could have them side by side. As I'm scanning this, I see no other reference to a density.
Yeah, I feel like that's it seems to me that that's an oversight. I mean, I kind of remember us talking about retail density and how it was a little bit complicated, and maybe there were some questions, because in the model regs, under E, tobacco product sales permit. Oh, I'm sharing, right? I'm still sharing. You can see what I'm looking at. There's this whole section on retail density. Sorry, it's a little hard to read because it has this highlight, but it says, you can't issue a new applicant for a retail location within 500 feet of a public school. And then it says a new tobacco product sales permit should not be issued to any new applicant for a retail location within X number of feet of an existing retailer with a tobacco product sales permit. I don't think we have that language in our regs. Did you notice that, Maheen, when you were looking through? Because under retail density, what I'm seeing is we only have the statement about schools. And then later on, when it comes to adult only, we have the statement that's with the wrong number, 50, but there's nothing else that I see.
Yeah, I didn't notice anything either.
So that seems like a problem.
I am not so sure that the 50, I'm not sure. I'm just not convinced that the 50 is the problem. I think the overarching problem is that there isn't, because that is actually supposed to be about adult only.
Right.
And so I think it made sense. Well, I don't know why it's there at all, but at some point we had a density, I think, akin to what was in that you just read, that you have to be X number of feet from an existing venue. And so if that was always the case, then the adult one is just a something specific to adult. And I don't know if that's trying to take into account a situation sort of like what we have if the other half was a all ages tobacco permit. So you could have sort of a side-by-side adult only and all ages. And just trying to make the doors not absolutely next to each other. So I agree that I think we are missing a general density statement, and I suspect it got dropped in our efforts to clarify something else, and we didn't realize we had completely taken it out.
I think I would be in favor of putting into the new regulations.
So when we're looking at 8B, adding 8B into our regulations, correct?
I can't read the thing that you're. Yeah.
Can you see my cursor? Anyway,
it's just so great that I get it.
Yeah.
Kind of easier if you zoom in, but
okay.
There's a little zoom button like right near the time, like all the way down on the right. Do you see that little plus on the side? At the
down
right panel.
over here.
Yeah.
Oh,
do you see-
yeah. Thank you. Is that better? Not
Kinda.
really. How's that? Better?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
good.
So I'm looking at our previous 2020 past regulations, and they have 50. So that hasn't changed since the last version.
For adult retailers.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I do not see any, it was never in there. We never had a density restriction that I can find. I mean, I'm doing searching on terms, so if it's phrased completely differently, but
Yeah, that's
So-
really interesting.
Do we have any sort of restrictions on or total number for the town? Is that a thing? I know it's
just
discussed,
that
with,
it's
like,
going down.
but we're not
Yeah.
capping the number.
We have, in these regulations, there's a cap.
Oh, there is a cap.
14, yeah,
14,
14
okay.
is our
All
number,
right.
yeah.
So that's
yeah.
consistent with the liquor stores and cannabis
Yeah,
in terms of having a limit. Or
Yeah.
cap.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the back. I have searched the words density within and feet in the old 2020 regs, and all I find are the restrictions away from schools. There used to be a restriction in healthcare settings, and we just combined those into one. So now it's just one paragraph.
Right.
And then it was always the 50 feet. There was nothing actually specifying that they should be 500 feet or whatever that would be from another licensed establishment.
I agree that 50 feet does seem,
Very
excuse me, very small. And,
Yeah,
you know, and theoretically at least could lead to increased density.
theoretically. I think it's unlikely to come to pass, but still, it's important to be thoughtful about how these are written. Okay, so Dia, you said you think that 8B, which we're looking at, should go back in. There should be some provision about retail density in our regs. Do others agree with that?
I could maybe provide some reasoning as to why I think it could be in there, if that's helpful.
Sure.
I think in alignment with the goals of the Town of Amherst Master Plan, I think having fewer locations is certainly achievable. And if we have, if we include provisions on density, we also solve the problem of having less stores. It's like if everyone wants to do it in downtown Amherst, then I think we're probably not addressing the issue. At any rate, I think it's a moot point to some extent because we have a capped number.
Right. That's right. Yeah, so maybe that's why it was taken out because not all municipalities decide to cap the number. That's something that we decided to do here. So maybe it doesn't need to go in. Thank you for pointing that out. And we don't need to
Go ahead.
create more work for ourselves is what I was going to say. Go ahead.
Well, doing search terms on all of these, there's a bunch of evidence that I think is even in ours about the fact that density increases use. So it does feel like two things. One is it does seem like we have evidence in our document that density is an issue and then nothing addressing that. And second, our second point under retail density is that the purchaser of a business with a valid business tobacco permit, the new location shall be subject to the retail density requirements within this regulation, and there aren't any. If I look at the model, it's actually referring back to, well, I guess there is one, which is the school and healthcare stuff, but yeah, there is a bunch of, in our references, there's quite a, let's see, 14, 15, 16, 17 are all evidence pieces on retailer density and why it is a problem. And then we don't actually address it. So it doesn't make sense to have it as citations if we're not using it.
Right, I understand. And I think as you're talking, I was thinking, so the people who hold valid tobacco sales permits now, I don't know if those are tied to a specific address. Or if I have a business on Pleasant, I have a permit, I'm gonna move my business someplace else. I still own the permit. Can I take the permit with me to the other business that's down the street next to another tobacco store, perhaps? If the permit is not tied to the address, then this retail density thing would be important to put in. If it is tied to the address, then it's more of a moot point. So it seems to me, I don't know the answer to that. I could find out. But maybe it's just safer to put this in there, to your point, Risha, because there's evidence about it and maybe things could change to the point where it would apply. So why not have it in there, I guess is the question.
I would agree with that. I think we should absolutely put it in there, especially if down the road we potentially float the idea of a nicotine-free generation for the town of Amherst, and that doesn't pass for whatever reason. It would also work in our favor to have both the cap and the density.
I have no objection to putting it in. We do have an additional decision to make, which is what is the amount of feet that we want them to be apart, and then the ongoing question of this 50. So we require 500 feet from schools, healthcare, etc. The suggested in the model regs is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 or more. I'm notoriously bad at imagining what a number of feet looks like. So understanding what that actually is.
What I wonder what we have for liquor stores and the cannabis as a frame of reference.
I don't know.
I should know that. I was on the planning board, but
I think I think more is still more here. I think if we have retail locations farther away, it still serves the purpose of reducing density. And the problem that might be necessary to consider is, say you have 3,000 feet and all of a sudden you have Lazy Lungs, for example, is the tobacco permit for downtown Amherst, which has a more dense population. So you have more people who rely on one particular location. So I don't know if competition is a sort of the right term here, but to think of that is potentially important. But I still think more is more. I think reducing the density problem means increasing the number of feet, and I'm in favor of doing at least 500 feet.
I am trying to look up the alcohol and nothing comes up immediately. I see very old complaints that they were within 500 feet. But not able to quickly answer that while we talk.
Well, the state recommendations begin with 1,000. I'm not sure, I'm assuming there was considerable thought that went into that, but perhaps not.
So I have a thought. Maheen, I don't know if you could, while we're in this conversation, if you could Google maybe the Northampton tobacco regulations and see what they have for retail density, if it's 1,000 or 500 feet or some other town around here, just to see what somebody else is doing. I mean, Northampton is a denser city center than Amherst, but still it's a point of reference. And then maybe we can come back to this before we end the conversation, just so you don't have to be searching, Risha, while you're trying to participate in this conversation. Does that sound okay? Then we can come back to just, so it sounds like you all have agreed to put this in, and we just have to figure out the number, and maybe Maheen can help with that while we're continuing to talk. And then for the 50-foot situation, I mean, I don't know whether a 0 got dropped off or whether that was put in there because there's something about lazy lungs to accommodate that particular situation that I'm not really thinking clearly about. I don't really know.
It seems a little bit moot if we've got this other, unless it's an exception to that rule, it would seem like you could not, so you certainly couldn't have 2 regular tobacco licenses. Is this saying that if one was an adult, that they could be closer? And really what that is one business with 2 separate areas.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I think I would go with the lower number. I mean, I mentioned 500. I think that's, if you got to put a number in there that's bigger than 50, that sounds kind of in the right ballpark.
I mean, I think just if it's not an error, and I can't, this is pre-2020 that this was put in, so I don't know at what point this was put in, or can't surmise if it might have been an error, but it strikes me that it is likely to try to sort of allow an adult only and a all ages to be side by side, and to say that their doors must be not abutting each other. That's how I am interpreting this, and I suspect other things got taken out in the meantime, and now it doesn't make any sense. But do we not want to allow that? And we should probably check what the actual licensing is in this case to make sure we're not causing a problem for an existing business that wasn't a problem earlier.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to think about is, I'm conscious of time, thinking about the other things we want to get done in the meeting, knowing that we want to have a final version of this so we can proceed with our plans to do the hearing in a month's time. I feel like I'm trying, and I don't have all the history because I haven't been here for that long. And I do know that we're Lazy Lungs. When I came into this job, there were conversations about the setup at Lazy Lungs. So Lazy Lungs did not exist when the 2020 regulations were written.
Okay.
There was another business there called, I can't remember, but there was a tobacco retailer there. I don't know whether they were also in the same situation of being an adult only place or what have you, but this can't have been written for Lazy Lungs the way it's currently set up. And I think that that whole construction of that side of the store is something that's fairly recent, because I remember the inspectors talking about counter height and that kind of thing since I've been here. So I'm feeling like, I appreciate what you're saying, Risha, that we don't want to put anything in here that's going to jeopardize local businesses. And the way I read this, it sounds like it would have to be 2 buildings with tobacco, 2 different sales permits. And there's only 1 permit for that location. So unless I'm missing something, it's not an exact match to the current Lazy Lung situation, this particular provision. So I guess I'm trying, do I need to do some more research before you all decide whether to take this out or put it in which case we wouldn't be able to have a final version today? Or is there some other way that we can solve this and have a final version today? Is my question to you.
I'm leaning to just leave it the way it is, tell you the truth. If it's
I mean,
been in
you-
there,
Because you said, Risha, this is what it looked like in the 2020 version, right? That's the premise that we're operating off of. So, I mean, it's not really going to have much relevance, I think, most likely. So maybe
Yeah.
we just don't touch it, is Jack's suggestion.
Yeah, I think if we put in an overarching density requirement, then this one becomes less urgent of an
Okay.
issue. But Daya had a hand.
Sorry, what does this mean for the 50 feet rule? Is this?
So
Yeah,
I think what we're suggesting is adding in the new paragraph that would set a minimum between any two license holders, and then leaving the paragraph with the 50 for adult only stores as is.
Are folks comfortable with that? There's only one, the other two issues are just to revisit the oral nicotine pouches. I sent you a bunch of info, and then just have a brief discussion about the nicotine-free generation policies, which you brought up a couple times, Daya. So it seems like that's a good solution, what you suggested, Risha. Any objections?
And we still need to have a number to put in that paragraph around the general, but
Yeah.
we can come back to that later in this meeting.
Okay, but I think we should try to come back to it while we're still on this agenda item. So I don't know, Maheen, if you're making any progress. She's nodding her head. I'll let you keep working. Okay, so then, and I also just wanted to reassure folks, you know, in trying to be diligent, going back to the top here, this checklist for policy decisions that was on this 2025 model, I did go through all of these just to make sure, and we have now addressed all of them with the exception of this last one, which is under oral nicotine pouches, sales restricted to adult only retailers. That is in what is in this current version that was recently, you know, the November version that you all voted on at that meeting. The other option is to prohibit more than 6 milligrams of nicotine per pouch. I don't think we discussed that as a group. We put in the language about restricting to adult only retailers. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that that is something that could be put in there. I sent you some links about that option for some places. I think there was one town that did opt to do that. But from my review of various things, it seems like most towns that have put something about oral nicotine pouches, and it's not all towns in the Commonwealth, but many towns, it's about, so, you know, restricting them to adult only retailers. So I did, again, I sent you some links. It was just yesterday. I don't know if people, sounds like Jack had a chance to look at some of that stuff, but any comments about that?
Where on the checklist is this? I am not being able to
Is
find
it,
it.
are you still seeing my screen? It's
I
number
am.
9. Number 9.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. My thought about this is that it's a lot more difficult and nuanced to enforce.
It's a different line.
Anyway, I think that it's sort of simpler to say these things can only be sold in certain places. Makes it easier to kind of just say, take them off the shelves across the board, except in these adult only places. And then if you were restricting to a certain amount, you'd have to go in and look at all the things that are there and making sure that they're under this certain amount. So I think my guess is that's why most folks who've adopted some language about this have chosen to do the more blanket restrict to adult retailers, which is what is in our current regulations, most recent version.
I would agree with that approach to restrict to adults only.
Thanks, Betsy.
I admit that I am swayed by the fact that it feels like a full discussion and digging in and understanding the research and da da da. And so I'm swayed by the easier way, which is to keep it as adult only, and not dig into the amount per package. But that is where I'm headed for the wrong reasons. That is where I'm headed.
I agree. I think this is, I think any amount of nicotine is bad. I think it's really bad for the brain, the developing brain especially. So I would be comfortable keeping it at adult only.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so Maheen, I'm gonna check in with you. Have you found anything about,
Not yet.
not, okay, about retail density?
Yeah, I feel like they didn't mention any specific like fee or anything.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think there were two other suggestions on the table, which was from Jack to go for 500 and from Premila 1,000, because that's the minimum that the state recommends or puts in their model. So,
And I had understood Jack's comment to be related to the adult only,
Oh.
changing the 50 to 500. So maybe worth just reiterating what people's suggestions were.
I'm kind of flopping around here. I'm sorry. I didn't Dia suggested the 500 and then you had some words that Risha that I thought were like leaving it alone sort of thing.
Yeah, on the 50, yes.
Yeah, keeping it 50. So I'm leaning more like to the 50 versus doing anything different with it because I don't know that I'd like to have a basis for making it different from from a planning side, and I don't feel comfortable doing that because I don't have enough information and choosing another number.
Yeah. And so I think that there are two things that are getting confused, I think, in multiple people here. The first is the adult only. It's already in our regs. It has been since the last version. And that is restricting the door of an adult only establishment 50 feet from the door of another licensed establishment. That one we are making a recommendation, and we haven't voted on it, still up for debate, but the recommendation on the table is to just keep that one as is and not get into that. What seems to be missing from the overall regs is a general density recommendation that is, or policy, that is from any two tobacco licenses from each other. And so that is in model regs, that is generally, it's in their checklist of things you should have in. And that's the one where their checklist suggests 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 or more. So their minimum suggestion is 1,000. We would like to add something in, and we just haven't come to that number. And I don't have any additional insight into what those numbers would be from, other rules of thumb or anything like that.
I think the 1,000 feet as suggested is as the minimum should be kept as a minimum, simply because it's stated as a minimum. Not a good reason, but
it's why they do it, so we'll default to that.
I'm also just thinking, suddenly it popped into my head about unintended consequences of changes, and just thinking about our current situation. I don't know if there are any tobacco retailers right now that are within 500 feet of each other, 1,000 feet of each other. Again, 1,000 feet, how far is that? I'm trying to think.
It's really, really small. I looked it up.
You did.
So because I don't have any sense of distance. So It's like 0.13 of a mile.
Yeah, it's
It's
3
really,
blocks.
really close.
It's about 3
3
blocks.
blocks.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we don't really have many blocks in Amherst, to tell you the truth, but
Yeah, that's not a great measurement in this town.
I'm thinking my hometown.
Most of our vendors are gas stations, is that correct? And then like a CVS type place.
Yeah, Cumberland Farms, gas stations. There are a couple of places on liquor stores sell cigarettes. And I'm trying to think about, there are a bunch of them that are actually not too far apart from each other. Right? So,
Which one are you thinking of?
Dia, help me out here because you're nodding your head too. No.
On College Street,
Yeah, thank you.
there's a liquor store, and then not 3 blocks away, but closer, there is a Cumberland Farms.
Yeah. So, so here's what's hard is that we don't have the history, right? I'm new, most of you are new. If there's no retail density paragraph in our regulations, it might be because there are already folks with existing permits that are legit, you know, of the 14 that we've allotted that are closer together. And so if we were to put this in here, that would be a problem.
Is it like a grandfather clause that is implied somewhere in our bylaws?
Well, I was looking up the wording because I think it is a new tobacco
okay,
product sales
New
permit
product,
shall
okay.
not be issued.
great, that's great. But again, we're not issuing new ones.
Maybe that's why we took it out.
Yeah.
If we're not issuing any new ones, we don't need to specify how far apart new ones will be.
Yeah.
The only exception to this is if you've bought the place and the sale issue.
Yeah, right.
So if Cumberland Farms sold and it was within 1,000 feet of a liquor store that was licensed to sell tobacco, we would not be able to issue them a renewed license at that location. Is sort of
Right,
what that would,
Right.
the only situation that would apply.
I personally don't see a problem with that.
I found
I
some
don't think it,
information- Oh, sorry.
Great,
Cool, go ahead.
please.
I found some information that said South Hadley mentioned 25 feet, and then Athol mentioned 500 feet.
And is that adult only or all?
Adult only.
Okay.
Interesting.
I saw but can't cite 1,000 feet for Northampton.
Say that again?
Okay.
I saw but cannot provide a citation for 1,000 feet in Northampton.
You saw that just like from a Google search, but you couldn't find it in the regs? Okay.
I feel like that we're probably debating something that will never happen because we don't issue new tobacco permits. However, I can see both sides of keeping it in there, right? You put it in there, we don't issue new tobacco permits in a very wild scenario like the one I just said, where if Cumberland Farms and it's already too close, we would not be able to issue that. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's, you know, gets us towards the intents that we want. On the other hand, if it's not there, it doesn't really change anything. We're not increasing the number of permits. Eventually they will all grandfather, or they will all be lost. So I'm not sure it's a super substantive issue, and yet I can see both sides of keeping it or keeping it as is or adding it in.
Just in the business of imagining scenarios that are egregious and all the possible scenarios, I think it would be good to include it. Even if it may not be directly relevant in the extreme situation where someone sells, it might be helpful toward moving toward our other goals.
The other thing is this is open for public comment. If we do it like we did last year, there will be a summary of substantive changes. This would be part of that. It would be flagged. If a business realizes that they would be subject to this, they would have a chance to tell us.
This is Betsy. Quick question. If a business is sold, presumably it's not sold with its license, correct?
That's correct. If the business is sold, then the permit does not transfer.
Right. So, I mean, although maybe none of the businesses look like they're planning to leave imminently, I think when you write regulations, can imagine that, some businesses, some of the 14 businesses in some time frame before we rewrite the regulations, will sell. So it may make sense to just keep it in with the idea that we're talking about new licenses. Is the
Notwithstanding a
number
cap. Sorry, I'm not sure that was totally correct, Kiko. I just want to, I know we had conversations about it and I'm trying to remember where we landed.
I mean, is the cap at 14?
The cap is at 14, but the seller of a business holding a valid tobacco sales permit may transfer said permit to a bona fide purchaser for the value of the business, subject to the approval of the Board of Health. The purchaser will apply for the transfer 60 days, no later than 60 days. So if you buy a business with an active license, you can buy that. You can transfer that permit.
Right, and this came up with the purchase of the liquor store on University Drive, I believe. They had applied for it post 60 days, after 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
That's right.
and came to the board about it and we said no.
That's right. Right. Okay. I remember that. I remember hearing about that. Yeah. I guess that's what it is. Yeah, you're right. I got it wrong. Thank you for clarifying that. It's if you don't sell the business, but you decide to give up the permit, it doesn't go back into the pool. Someone else can't have access to it, goes away. So there you go. Yeah. Okay. So then all that said, it sounds like what I'm hearing is you want to stick with the retail density, put in the retail density clause for either 1,000 or 500. I think you're still trying to decide on that number, right? And then leave the adult only one language, as you said before, the way it is, just leave it in there. But it's going to go before the public, so we'll see what happens. So then 500, 1,000, thoughts about that?
I'd vote for 1,000. Again, because it's the minimum on the state regs. That's really all I've got to go for.
Yeah. We followed most other things, thanks, Pramila, in the regs. So that seems like a reasonable suggestion.
I'm not the only vote, though, so feel free to speak up if someone wants 500.
I know, Jack, do you have anything to say?
No, I guess, I'm fine with that 1,000. I was fine with 0 or nothing. I don't have strong feelings on this, so I kind of
I don't think it's likely to be an issue again, because there's such a small thing that it could apply to, and it's the sale of in the same location that's already too close.
Right. Agreed. Okay, so I've made notes of all these things that everyone has sort of agreed on. Yeah. Do you want to? I mean, it's all captured in the minutes, and what do you want to do at this point, Risha? Do you want to take a vote of the group on all of the sort of consensus decisions that we've reached now, that this would be the final version, even though we don't have it right in front of us because these changes need to be made?
Yes, I think let's summarize the decisions we've suggested and take a vote.
Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at that and then tell me if I
Good
forgot
luck.
anything. So, because it is a few things. And Maheen, feel free to jump in if you've been tracking on this as well. So the group did agree to add those evidence statements that we looked at about nicotine pouches that are in the first section. of the regulations, we agreed to add the definition of the retail establishment because it's referred to in the regulations, but we didn't have it in the definition section. We decided not to include that language about secure access for 21 and older in an adult. The word secure, the extra sentence, the board decided not to add that. You all decided to, yes, add the additional details about the manufacturer's letter, which you all thought would be helpful with the exception of that first one that said should be written by the board, the manufacturer, because that was redundant to what was in the paragraph ahead of it. Hope I'm making sense. You also did agree to add the 2 sentences about the revocation of the permit if there was fraudulent activity related to the permit application or any violation of state laws on behalf of the person applying for the permit. And we just agreed to add the retail density section with 1,000 feet to leave the 50-foot for the adult retailers. And then finally to be satisfied with the current language about restricting nicotine pouches to only adult-only retailers and not to put in language about the amount of prohibiting more than 6 milligrams of nicotine per pouch.
You did not need luck. That was really well summarized.
Yes, thank you.
Fab. Okay, there you have it.
So can I motion? Can a chair motion?
Sure.
So I so motion that everything Kiko said gets adopted into the tobacco regulations.
I second.
I
Okay.
agree.
All in favor then?
I.
I
And any opposed? No.
All right, great.
Thank you everyone for that. I know that took a little more time maybe than we thought, but I think we're in good shape.
It's not the time, it's the brain, man.
The brain.
It's a lot.
So I'm gonna punt it to you in a second, Risha. I think you have a plan for how to approach the body art regulations from here. But before I do that, I just wanted to say that I did send to all of you some information about the public hearing, you know, how it goes, you know, what the role of the chair is. There's even a suggested script for the Board of Health's chair and an introductory statement, those kinds of things. And Risha, obviously you and I will be talking separately beforehand to kind of prepare for this. There are certain things that we will, as staff, bring to the hearing, you know, relevant information, you know, handouts, stuff like that, that we can have. We have decided to do this as an in-person meeting. The regulations or policy require that it be physically accessible. So in a building that's accessible, the Bank Center is accessible. We have a room reserved for February 6th at 5 p.m. or earlier, actually at 4 p.m. because we'll all gather earlier. So we'll be in person. The hybrid situation in the town room is very difficult to manage and would require a dedicated IT person to be with us that evening, which I was not able to secure. So that's why we just thought we'll do in person. We'll meet in person as a board first for half an hour or so. We can talk about that before we finish today. And then the hearing would start at 5 and is open to the public. And I'll be learning more about, you know, where people sit and how we manage all of that. But one other thing that staff here will be doing is sending out a letter to retailers with a copy of the new regs and pointing out specifically, I sent you a sample of this, all the changes that are going to be discussed at the hearing. And we'll be putting a public notice in the newspaper and posting it on the website. So there's a lot of kind of clerical stuff that we have to manage 3 weeks beforehand. And then we'll be good. We'll have some conversations, Risha, you and I, about how to prepare. But I think for the rest of the board, it's just a question of coming and being able to answer questions that people might pose about why decisions were made. Any questions about that?
No, thank you for all that information. Well, that was useful to read over.
Sure. Okay, so onward to body art.
Did you want to talk about nicotine-free generation?
Oh God, thank you. Yes, I did. And Dia, you brought it a couple of times, and I think there's been a lot of conversation about it. So since we met last, Belchertown did pass nicotine-free generation laws. I think we had all agreed last time, and I had mentioned to you that Northampton also is sort of on the same path of there's a lot happening. We want to get our regulations covering many of the things that we talked about today in shape, and the nicotine-free generation thing might kind of jeopardize some of that stuff. So let's have more conversations as a board about what it would mean for Amherst to implement a nicotine-free generation policy. Is that something that people are in favor of? I thought we could have sort of a mini conversation about it right now, just to kind of hear from people about what your initial thoughts are, and if there's anything that we should be doing in the next little while to prepare for further discussions, have someone come in and talk about it. You know, what is it that you as a board would need to feel well-informed to make a decision about this in, you know, the next year or so? Because I think this is going to start moving quickly.
Yeah, I guess I can start since I was perhaps vocally in favor of this. I think, you know, this is an opportunity to align our actions with our values. I think as a town, I think it would be really transformative for generations to come. And I think we have the opportunity to set a standard for Hampshire County potentially, beside Belchertown, who has recently done this. But I think it would only make sense for us to pursue this.
I'm trying to look at each of you, but you don't know I'm looking at you. Does anyone else have any gut reactions or questions or concerns?
As a healthcare provider, it makes sense to me. Or I would support it, I guess. I would say it's just from a health perspective.
Yeah, as a non-healthcare person, I'm trying to understand it more because, you know, here we have just the cannabis, you know, laws went into effect. So there's like promoting one type of smoking, not promoting it, but allowing it. So with the tobacco, the main problem is the nicotine, but there's also tar. And so I'm trying to separate, are we trying to separate smoking, or is it just the nicotine part of the cigarettes? Because, you know, smoking is kind of a pastime. It, you know, if it can be done safely, that's, you know, in moderation, that's, you know, I don't know that we want to limit that freedom for people, sort of thing. So I'm trying to understand what is the health impact there. So I guess I need to be educated on what this is geared toward and what specifically about the cigarettes. And if you are smoking some other product that's not tobacco, that's not cannabis, do those things exist? I think there is. I think there's other stuff that you can smoke that's not tobacco. So I don't know what that is, but
I mean, I am speaking out loud and thinking out loud. I don't have an opinion, but I guess I am surprised that my gut reaction is not more supportive of this. And just talking through why that is. One is that I tried to click on all the evidence in what you sent through, Kiko. A lot of the links were broken, which is really frustrating. The CDC, you know, data is not there anymore. When I went into the Massachusetts data, our smoking rates, particularly under 18, but all over, are quite low and some of the lowest in the country. And so it's sort of, you know, I feel like this would be a lot of political capital. We would definitely be sued. There would be costs to the town to defend it. And to what end, right? I mean, we're sort of already at a fairly end stage of, you know, 14 capped retailers. And so I'm not quite sure it's the battle I want personally to put the town into. If the state did it, I wouldn't be opposed to it necessarily, but in terms of where I'm looking at what our town is dealing with in terms of education and roads and all the other things, and saying, like, you know, do we need to have a lawsuit right now that we have to fight and pay lawyers for on this? Because it will. I would not expect people to just accept it. And then I guess I do have a question about outright banning something. It didn't work with alcohol very well. I'm not sure it's the best public health model here either. Certainly support restrictions and would like people to stop smoking altogether, but I'm just not sure that this is the one for me.
Yeah, I guess I can, there's a couple of points I'm just thinking about. I really appreciate, Risha, you mentioning specifically the pushback that might occur. I think, Jack, to your point about there being sort of healthier options of smoking, no amount of smoking, to my understanding, is healthy or ever can be. I think there's a particular challenge with nicotine, with adolescents, with developing brains. And I think if we're fighting the battles of education and making Amherst more family friendly, we also have to seriously consider how nicotine can impact our youth and our communities. That said, I do think we should think about this more deeply, and perhaps we're not going to solve this right now, but I do think it's important to consider.
Premila or Betsy, to either of you, no pressure, but if you wanted to weigh in, go ahead.
This is Betsy. I have some thoughts. I really had as my instincts very much what Risha said. I feel like one of the things I don't know is how much having a ban just gets someone else to do the buying for the youth, as opposed to actually changing smoking behavior. So I think it seems to me like if it were a state ban, that would be effective, but I'm not sure on a town by town basis that it's helpful. I agree that there will probably be lawsuits. I heard some withering criticism of the Belchertown move, and while I think smoking does not have anything good about it, I'm not sure that's the battle that I would choose right now. I actually think the heavy cannabis legal impact on youth by the legalization seems to me, from a behavioral health point of view, really quite worrisome for youth. So I'm not sure that's the battle I would go down on my sword on at this point, but I haven't thought deeply about it. I haven't looked at the research, and I would certainly want to do that before before going down that road, because I think it will be contentious and it would be spending a lot of political capital.
Yeah, I think Risha and Betsy made very good points. About whether this is the hill we want to die on. So yeah, further discussion after doing more research.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad that everyone got a chance to say their piece. I think it's really important just to sort of set the stage or begin to explore how people might feel. I just wanted to say a couple things, which is that when I first heard about it, sorry, I have something in my throat. I had the same reaction as you did, Risha. I thought, wow, that seems like and you, Jack, that sort of seems like a violation of human rights in a way, to take away access to a substance, and, can't people make their own choices if they're well informed, and, prohibition didn't work and all those kinds of things. And I've read a little bit more about it, and and I'm starting to shift a little bit there. And I still think it's worthy of a lot of exploration. I think it's always good not to be the first. I'm glad that Belchertown stepped up. Good for them. I think Northampton is also kind of weighing it carefully and sort of waiting in the wings to see. There's definitely a lot of talk about how the current restrictions that we have in Massachusetts about tobacco use really came because local municipalities passed laws, and those kind of trickled up, and then the state did something broader. And so people are saying the same thing could happen here. If these nicotine-free generation policies get passed locally, that could put pressure on the state to do something statewide. So do we want to be part of that political situation or not? That is, I think, a good question. And every town is different. Like Belchertown politics are different from Amherst politics. So we have to weigh all those kinds of things in terms of making a decision. But a couple things that sort of made me think about it more differently is that some folks had said what's good about this is that it allows people who are it's not prohibition across the board. It allows people who are using nicotine to continue to use it, because as we know, it's a highly addictive substance. So to suddenly say, sorry, you can't have access to that, it's going to be really problematic for people who are already smokers and who are addicted. And instead, what it does is it restricts access to young people. And I think the eventual goal of it, I mean, sure, I've had the same questions. Oh, you can just cross state lines or get someone to go to Connecticut and buy your stuff if you can't get it in Massachusetts. But eventually what will happen if this is sort of the ability for young people to get these things, and yes, youth smoking rates are down, that is true. I think what's problematic is that vaping and access to nicotine in other forms is up, and those nicotine pouches are inexpensive and very concentrated. So young people are actually getting more nicotine and using those. So those would also be not accessible to young people. But that it would be eventually something that young people just don't track on. Like, I heard a hilarious story the other day about how someone had an intern that they had to teach how to use a desk phone because she didn't know what that was. She only had a cell phone. And so that's a generational shift. Young people don't use stamps or even have good handwriting because nobody writes letters anymore. So I sort of imagine that this would be the beginning of changing what is a cultural norm and what is acceptable stuff for people to do in a given generation. I think that's kind of how people are thinking about it. So, and then one other thing that I heard somebody say was, well, at what age exactly would you like your child to begin smoking? And that this is something that would just not allow that to happen. So like you, I'm not 100% convinced, but I'm listening to the evidence, I'm thinking about it, and I feel like it's something that we as a board, or you all as a board, can contemplate in a thoughtful way as we see how things unfold in the next year or so.
Thank you, Kiko. I would also like to offer up just collecting evidence from neuroscientists on the impact of nicotine on the brain. There have been suggestions that it's as addictive as cocaine or heroin or perhaps more. So I can pull together some resources, but thank you for your summary.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that is important, that nicotine, that all drugs are not created equal, and some are more addictive than others. And cannabis is not as addictive as nicotine. And Betsy, as you've also pointed out, I've heard lots of stories just from a friend of mine who's a nurse about these syndromes that they're seeing in people who are heavy cannabis users, hyperemesis, lots of, not being able to function because they're just nauseous all the time. So that's excessive use, but still there are many problems, I guess, that we could be thinking about from a public health perspective. So it does warrant more consideration. So, yeah. But thank you for considering it with me this evening. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it back to you, Risha, for the plan for body art regulations.
And I hope that any reporters who watch this later are thoughtful about the fact that none of us are stating strong opinions that one way or the other, and that it's a discussion and sort of trying to surface ideas and not quote any of us for or against any of this at this point as we try to make up our minds.
It's a complicated issue. It's not something that you can simply say without thinking yes or no, I think. So thank you for that, Risha.
Thank you.
Now recognizing that we get quoted when people watch these later.
Yeah.
So conscious of time, I did not intend to spend much time on this, so I don't think that will be too difficult. We're not going to get into the details of the body art regulations. What I wanted to do was sort of propose a way forward, which ultimately I would like to see if there's a volunteer of someone who's willing. Let me back up. I think what I learned by going through the body art, the tobacco regulation process, is that it is very hard to make group decisions only on these calls. Each of us has to do the thinking, and then we're not sure, and there's always more information that we want to get, and so it just drags out. And then, as we're finding now, by the time we get to the end, a whole new set of things have come in to be considered, and so we can sort of never end. So what I'd like to suggest with the body art is that I'm happy to do it if someone else would volunteer to work with me, is to tackle the remaining issues and come back with a set of recommendations that we then can all discuss, hopefully in a shorter time, because some of the more detailed thinking will have already sort of happened. And it can only be one person because we can't have 3 people from a board speak on an issue outside of a meeting. But the other thing I'd like to do briefly is just make sure that nobody had any thoughts and, hadn't, particularly if they're not volunteering to work with me on this, and that we hear any sort of further considerations that we should make before we go in and start to try to make some recommendations that you guys can then all vote on and debate. So I guess the first question is, did anyone have anything? We have outstanding issues on still that training around the anatomy and physiology requirement, a whole thing on apprenticeships, a whole thing on guest artists, and then genital piercing. And so I guess the question is, has anyone done any legwork, found out new information that we should all have, had any thoughts that they want to make sure whoever is going to work on this is considering?
I guess I have a question about the Save Each Life, or the course recommended for the piercers. I know there was talk about potentially taking one of the tests and seeing if the material is, I don't know if that's still on the table.
Yeah, I reached out to them and they would not share the test with me. I would have to pay and have it done. They referred me, and I said I was on the Board of Health and that this was to understand if it would meet our requirements, but they were not willing to share that. So the option would be to pay to do it.
Yeah. And I also did reach out to our contacts in Northampton. I didn't manage to get in touch with anybody in California. That was a little bit more of a project, but I can still do that. But I did want to ask them about how they determined that Save Each Life was a course that they felt met the requirements. And also they had said there was another course which I couldn't find. So, but I haven't heard back from them. I think post holidays, everyone's in a catch-up mode and it's hard to, I didn't want to pester them, but I can follow up again about that. So, I mean, and I will contribute, obviously, Risha, to your group of 2 that's working on this. The other thing that's coming up is that we have a meeting with the Hadley Board of Health, Betsy and Risha. Betsy, because it was a colleague of yours, a friend of yours who is on the board or works for Hadley.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a nurse practitioner who's on the Hadley Board of Health. So I asked her what she had done, and she said, "Oh, we've just revised our stuff, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it." So that's how that.
That's next week.
Yeah, that's next week.
I was going to say I would be delighted to work with Risha.
I guess we should see if anyone else does, but I'm just happy to have a volunteer. Thought it might be a long ask.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy if somebody else wants to do it too, but I'd be more than happy to work with you, which I'm not.
That sounds like a good team. It's helpful, I think, Betsy, since you're a physician and there's, there are anatomy questions that come up. I mean, Pramila, you could also, I'm certainly doing the job, but it's great that Betsy is volunteering.
Although Risha gets all the issues right away anyhow.
Yeah. Oh, there was one other thing and Maheen looked at the Hadley regs today and they don't have references to guest artists or apprentice, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to ask them, because Risha, that was something you wondered about, like maybe it's too complicated and it shouldn't be allowed at all. But we can talk with them about that next week, why that's not there.
Great. Yeah, the more I get into this, the more I'm sort of convinced we have added I think what's happened is that we had a document and we just kept adding to it. And so now it's, spelling everything out. And when I look at others they're much slimmer and much more sort of streamlined in what they're trying to regulate. And so that's sort of, I'm interested to see, but I can't figure out how to cut things easily, but it does feel like we might have sort of things from the past that are no longer as relevant as they should be.
But the issue of guest artist, I believe originated from a local request. That's why we
true.
had to look at it, right? So
Mhm. That's correct.
Yeah.
And another thing that I want to do as part of, working on this is to go and talk with Stephen, I'm forgetting his last name, but who's the owner of Wanderlust Tattoo the only body art practitioner in Amherst, because it did come from them. You're right, Premila, it was their request. So to understand more about what the needs are, and because I think really it is about how you had so many questions, Risha, about if you're a guest artist, how often do you get, and how long before you get to work on someone without somebody watching you? Like those kinds of stipulations weren't spelled out in the regulations, and should they be, and how would that go? So, I mean, talking with a practitioner might be able to shed some light or answer some of those questions and help us figure out how to proceed.
Great. So did anyone else have any thoughts they wanted to make sure? I guess, are everyone okay with Betsy being the other person to join me? Anyone really, really wanted to do this? All right. So I thought that was probably not going to happen, but who knows? So anybody else have anything that they want to make sure that we consider? Obviously, we're not making any decisions. We're just going to come back with some recommendations. Okay. I won't commit us to a timeline, but we'll try to move as quickly as we can. And thank you, Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy.
Bye-bye.
Oh, are you leaving us?
Oh,
we're still on. We have a few more items.
Okay, I'm in my car, no problem.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Okay, so then I think we're definitely over time. I'm just going to quickly give you a couple of updates. Let's see. I think, so in terms of respiratory illness, I had told you all that the wastewater surveillance, which we really depend on to help us gauge how much COVID infection is in the community, was offline for a while, and now it's back online, but just once a week samples. But we are beginning to see, there was really not a lot happening, as evidenced by what I heard about national trends in November, but then starting in December, it's begun to creep up. So now it's creeping up. It's an upward trend, and it will probably continue to go up, the wastewater levels. So, we have all of our usual tests, PPE here for people. We're advertising that, spread the word. We have lots of tests for people to come, especially those who don't have resources to purchase them. And we have masks and gloves as well. We're going to plan one final clinic. I believe it will be on February 5th, so the day before our public hearing here at the Bangs. Really want to involve, encourage people who haven't yet gotten a COVID and or flu vaccine to come, and also young people. I had recently found out that the pharmacies, which is where we are often referring a lot of people, and where pediatricians are referring sometimes their families with children for vaccines, is that children on Mass Health can't always get vaccinated at the pharmacies. There are a lot of complicated situations, and I found out about this because I was there getting my shingles vaccine, and the nurse was telling me how she sometimes has to turn away families on on Mass Health with small kids because the Minute Clinic can't do their vaccines. Very complicated. All that to say, we really want to be able to offer this service to children. We did have quite a lot of families with young kids coming to the two clinics that we did have. So just in the interest of boosting community immunity, we're hoping to get more families and other folks who just haven't gotten around to getting their shot yet to come and get vaccinated in February. So that's on the agenda. Go ahead.
Would it make sense to share that with the superintendent's office to put into their school?
Absolutely. Yes, we will do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really important. And then I also wanted to say that we did have an update from the State Department of Health this week about H5N1, about avian flu. So things have kind of ticked up to a more serious level at this point. no cases, no human to human transmission cases have been documented, but there was a death of somebody in Louisiana died from avian flu. This was somebody who had a backyard chicken flock. He was a person who was over 65 and had underlying medical conditions. But it is still concerning that we have now our first death from H5N1 in the country. So I feel like there's some level of kind of conversation and amplification of concern that we want to start to spread without causing undue panic. The main issue at this point is what was focused on the call. And if this is this information that you all already have? Because I won't bore you if you know this already. I'll keep talking. Cut me off if I'm becoming boring. So backyard chickens are definitely a concern. People who have flocks, according to the state, they're not requiring that people use PPE, but I happen to know many people who own chickens and they do use gloves and masks when they're cleaning up chicken coops and whatnot. It's probably a good precaution at this point. The virus has been found in some cats, domestic cats and feral cats, and cats don't do well with this. I think it's a 50% mortality rate for cats. So there is the recommendation that people not feed, if it's an indoor cat, it's probably not at risk unless you feed that cat raw food, raw milk, raw meat, kibbles that are made with raw meat that could have poultry that has avian flu in it. So that's not recommended. At this stage, the primary prevention tactic is to keep the virus in the animal population and to prevent it from getting into people's homes and into domestic animals, because it could begin to mutate and jump from domesticated animals. I guess especially pigs are very concerning because the virus can mutate in pigs and then become more likely to cross over to humans. So that has not happened yet. It is, but we're really telling people to be cautious about cats and what you're feeding cats. Also, not consuming raw milk. Humans or animals should not be consuming raw milk because that's potentially a source. There are dairy herds, many herds in California that have been infected with avian flu. And some people who have gotten avian flu have gotten it from milk contact. It has showed up as a mild conjunctivitis, so not a respiratory illness. But with any of these viruses, you always worry that they can mutate and change and become more powerful respiratory viruses and become ones that can transmit from humans to humans. In Massachusetts, we've been really diligent about testing dairy herds, and there have not been any cases of herds here in Massachusetts that have H5N1. No cows have tested positive. I think we've done a really good job there. So the advice right now from DPH is, about saying proper protection if you have backyard chickens, worrying about your cats if you have outdoor cats and their contact with bird feces with chickens, and then feeding of raw milk and raw feed to domestic animals. Cats and dogs don't seem to be as susceptible to the virus as cats, but still, you want to try to keep it out of the canine population as well. So I think it's, of course, I get a little panicky when I think about a virus and, always, we've been through it with COVID. Nobody wants another mass pandemic. Hopefully we can be smart about this and, people can follow these recommendations. I think if it escalates to the point where it's going to be required for people with chickens to wear PPE, the state will be giving us that recommendation. And it's actually MDAR, the Mass Department of Agriculture, that is interfacing with farmers and whatnot who keep birds to make sure that people are aware. So it's not really our responsibility as a health department to do that work. It's an agricultural responsibility, but it's important for us to be aware, and we will be putting some information about this on our website just so everybody in the community understands. No need for panic, but let's be cautious and let's be aware of what's going on with this virus. So. I think those are really the main things. I wasn't sure if I told people last time that we do have a free sharps disposal kiosk in the bank center now. So if people have sharps that they're using at home for whatever reason, they can get a free container whenever we're open between 8 and 4, this building, from the kiosk on the ground floor, use it for sharps, and then bring it back here to the kiosk and dispose of it there without charge and without having to come to the health department. We used to charge some money for it and had to have people fill out a form, but now we have this free kiosk, which is great. So it's been really well used. It gets filled up quite quickly. So we're happy to be providing that service to the community. And then I think the last thing was just in terms of our next meeting. So the Board of Health, the hearing, tobacco regulations hearing will be starting at 5 o'clock, as I said, in person here in the Bangs. We talked about having a very short Board of Health meeting beforehand, starting I think at 4:30 can work. We do have one agenda item that is of some urgency, which is for Craig's Doors, the shelter in town. They in the past have had a variance that they have to come to the Board of Health to request. I think it got overlooked last year, which is why they didn't come to us last year, but the year before they did, because they are currently in the Emmanuel Lutheran Church is where the Craig's Door shelter is, and there is not a shower there. There are bathrooms, toilets, sinks, but not a shower. And so they have other arrangements where they have a shower off-site that people can use. But it's housing code, you know, there's a provision in housing code that any place where people are sleeping, staying, must have a shower. So we obviously do not want to do anything to jeopardize the operation of Craig's Doors, especially given this cold winter weather that we're having. But we do, as a board, need to have this hearing and issue this variance based on what you all hear from them in order to follow code, essentially. So Susan Malone did an inspection just at the end of last month to look at this. So I'm telling you this because this is going to be an agenda item, and I think it's going to be the most important agenda item. Other things, body art regulation, I think the work group will go on for some time, so it doesn't need to be on the agenda on the 6th, but this item will be. So just putting that out there for folks. Any questions about that? So my thought is really just hopefully if there's something else pressing that we need to hear as a board, we'll add that. But at this point, it will just be that item and then just, check the usual sort of checking in, approval of minutes, public comment, whatnot. And then we'll move to have the hearing at 5 o'clock. Does that sound okay? Okay. And then finally, we just wanted to, I think we can talk more at our next sort of substantive meeting, which will be in March, about how we want to structure the rest of the year, what things we want to talk about, more nicotine-free generation, well regulations, the body art stuff coming in and out. Do we have a target date by when you all would like to finish that? Those kinds of things we can discuss in March. But what Mahina and I wanted to ask was, we were going to try to send out the Zoom invitation as a recurring meeting. So instead of getting a Zoom meeting every month, there would just be one, I think, that would go out with all the dates in it, but maybe there'd be a reminder that Zoom would generate. I'm not exactly sure, but we also wanted to know, some of you may use Outlook and some of you may not, but would it be valuable for us to send out a calendar invitation in Outlook that would then block the time on your calendars and issue a reminder to you about the upcoming meeting, in addition to the Zoom email that comes with the link? Just trying to make it easy for you all. But
I
not
no
everyone
longer
uses
use
I don't know
Outlook,
if
so
that's helpful.
don't do it
Yeah.
for my sake.
Don't do it for your sake. Okay. Any other thoughts about that?
I think a Google Calendar would be helpful, but I currently think that the current strategy is working okay.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the invitation we got for this one, and it has an option to add to a Google, Outlook, or Yahoo calendar. So it probably the way you're sending it now would be each of us could figure out how to add it to the calendars we use.
Okay.
Maybe I can send it to all three, like Yahoo, Outlook, and Gmail.
I mean,
think-
the way it came through today has the option to do any of those on our own. It just is a button we click. So I don't know that you have to do something separate for.
That sounds like the best way to proceed then. I didn't realize that you could do that because I get a different invite as a host, I think, than what you all get. So it sounds like you're able individually to choose from that email whether to add it to an Outlook, Yahoo, or Google Calendar. Is that right? Dia, are you seeing that as well? Okay.
Yeah, I had forgotten about it. Thank you for bringing it up.
Okay. That seems better because I think it wouldn't make sense for us to generate an Outlook invite if Betsy and others are maybe not going to see it or use it. So, okay. I think we're good. Anything else?
No, I think we need someone to motion to end the meeting though.
So motioned.
Second.
And thank you. Any objections to ending the meeting? I look forward to seeing you guys all in person, meeting some of you for the first time in person. And have a great month.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Take
Have a
care.
good evening. Thanks.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.